Omaha, Nebraska. It's ranked outstanding in hospitals, rail networks, its zoo, technology, flourishing arts and music scene, and more. It's an attractive city because of its central location and its investment in employment. In fact, the city boasts one of the lowest unemployment rates at 2.2%. However, one factor inhibiting its growth is the transportation system. Metropolitan Area Planning Agency and Omaha Metro work closely to fund and plan better routes and connections for residents. 8 University of Nebraska at Omaha journalists created the following 3-part series to uncover where the system is today, how it got there, and what's in store for the future. Welcome to Omaha Transit. I'm your host, Anna Bellinghausen, and we'll hear from myself, Avery Howard, and Alexa Blaze as we share the story of Omaha. It's been a full year since the launch of the Omaha Rapid Bus Transit System, and residents still say it's not enough.
If you don't have the car, the ability to drive a car, whether it's financial ability or physical ability, you're kind of treated as a second-class citizen, and that's just unacceptable in my opinion. We really just, peg ourselves as a car-dependent city, and we need to get real about it when it comes to like a climate action perspective, just efficiency in all sorts of ways.
Orbit runs along Dodge from 10th Street to West Roads, offering rides every 10 minutes at its peak hours.
I think it's like a little step in the right direction. I think that it shows that there is interest. Again, it wasn't because of the city of Omaha. It was a Tiger grant, so it was federally funded for the most part.
So what's missing for the city's transit system? Johnson says it's money, as Omaha has half the amount of funding per capita as its peer cities.
We're not a tiny town anymore. We need to grow up and really get real with the whole transportation ecosystem.
Officials from MAPA and Omaha Metro say there is a need for more transportation systems here in Omaha, and that begins with Metro Next, the 5-year plan to build a transportation system across 24th Street.
Especially being a north-south connector is just such a corridor of activity. There's so many jobs and nonprofits and schools and healthcare systems. Like, there's a lot of opportunities to make really good connections on 24th Street.
Jason Rose says he hears the demand for expansion, and Metro Next is one plan to deliver that.
The hope is that we can sort of increase that funding, grow our service level, and provide more options for people.
As Omaha Metro awaits legislation to pass for more funding, residents like Johnson continue to voice concerns.
It's frustrating. It's exhausting.
While there's no magic wand to fix the transportation system, Rose says Metro Next can help put Omaha above the curve.
The more we can kind of grow the system, the better we can make our system, the more people will adopt it. And it just makes for a better city, and it makes for a better experience for everyone when people have a multitude of options to get around.
And what about the pending legislation? The Build Back Better Act is the president's second massive spending initiative, and that will scale down from $3.5 trillion to $2 trillion and hopes to get more support among reluctant Democrats and Republicans. It's currently stalled in D.C. The Senate Majority Leader intends to pass the bill by Christmas. Avery Howard joins us now to unveil the ugly side of history in Omaha.
It's a sensitive topic, but it is important as citizens of a city we love to know where we came from. In our research about Omaha and redlining, we learned about the long-lasting history and effects segregation and redlining has on our city. Years after redlining was federally implemented in the 1930s, the Black community in North and South Omaha flourished after being isolated to fend for themselves. However, after 30 years of this, tension and anger built up, leading to the riots of the 1960s. These acts of frustration were rooted in the lack of resources and services. Although we like to believe we have made many steps forward, and in some areas we have, but if 2020 was our proof, we still have a long way to go and many more conversations to be had. Issues that are alive today in our city are rooted in problems unaddressed from our history. As Latrina Hall and Cameron Logsdon will speak on, change in the future comes with educating one person at a time. As Anna explained, Omaha finds itself a global competitor in business, healthcare, and agriculture. But it also finds itself with a recognizable history of segregation and blatant racism.
It's the fact that Omaha is segregated is no secret to anybody that lives in Omaha.
There were signs of it scattered among all neighborhoods and communities. From the earliest actions from the Omaha Claim Club, the founding fathers of Omaha, who forced out what they said were to be undesirable settlers.
What's left when people leave are these abandoned houses and no government, city, county intervention to say, let's pour back into the neighborhoods. So, yeah, I think that jives with what happens across the country in a lot of big cities.
At the turn of the century, North Omaha established itself as a home to immigrants settling in the area: Czechs, Scandinavians, Germans, and a growing Jewish community. However, over time, as the history books reveal, these groups self-segregated and the Black community became isolated.
You can see how those decisions have impacted the choices to put this store in this area versus in another area, or to not have a bank in this area versus another area, or a grocery store. So, I think some folks just have to take the blinders off.
Despite being isolated, the Black American community grew and flourished. The men and women opened successful businesses, renting storefronts from the Jewish community and expanding success along Lake Street.
I think it also meant that folks came together to say, well, then we'll create our own stores. We'll create our own banks. We'll have, then we'll be the ones teaching at our schools. We'll create whatever is needed and have that for each other.
Richard Rothstein explains in his book, The Color of Law, Omaha's Black doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs were viewed as threatening to the city's white leaders. As a result, a literal red line was drawn around the North Omaha community. Passed down from the federal government as a part of the New Deal in 1933, this legislation was meant to expand suburbia to whites and push people of color into housing projects where access to loans were virtually non-existent.
This whole idea of redlining was taking this red pen and creating a circle on a map and saying, really, white people should not live here. This is a hazardous area. So white people should live over here, which then kind of relegated folks, especially people of color, to certain areas.
Look like this. This is a racial dot map of Omaha based on data from the 2010 census. The orange dots are Hispanic Latino residents. The red dots are Asian Americans. The green dots, African Americans. And the blue dots are Smurfs. I'm kidding. It's the whites.
Local comedian Cameron Logsdon uses satire to get this message across to a wider audience.
As a comedian, I was like, okay, here's something we all know, we all see, but do we understand it? So how can we make something that we don't understand accessible and funny? And what I learned was that the segregation and the racial division that we have in the city is dated back to very specific racist legal policies, things that were considered legal, racist policies that drove hard lines in our city.
3 decades after the Housing Act was signed by FDR, Omaha's streets turned bloody as those in redline communities fought back in the form of riots.
When you start to see how communities, how the disinvestment began to impact them more, it was when you had government intrusion, like, we're going to create this highway that is now going to separate your communities. And so all that you've known in terms of being insulated and being able to support each other and thrive with all your different businesses, that's going to be cut in half. And so now your communities are going to be separated.
Stemmed from pent-up anger surrounding the lack of resources and services offered to the North Omaha community. The catalyst for the Red Summer in 1966 was the killing of a 19-year-old by an off-duty white police officer.
And then you have the 60s and the violence that kind of breaks it up. And I think we were also just, you just look at American history, it was also coming to like a head. It was like a powder keg, because so the civil rights movement was kind of forcing folks to think about like, well, we have just as much right to live in West Omaha or to live wherever we want as anyone else.
Fast forward to 2020, the climate of unrest was all too familiar. The city was an inferno waiting for its spark.
The Omaha Police Department. This has been declared an unlawful assembly. You have 10 minutes to disperse this location.
And I think that what happens is when we look at the summer of 2020, West Omaha had a very harsh light shine into some of its darkest paths and its darkest truths in the most tragic of ways.
That happened on May 29th and 30th, when a black man was shot and killed in Omaha's Old Market. A new generation of protesters emerged.
It was a harsh wake-up call for our city. People had to say, this is a problem here too. They're seeing it on the national news, but now it was right here at home. And when people are protesting, we're starting to recognize Omaha is not as Midwest nice as it wants to say it is, and we have a lot of soul searching to do. And we started that work, but it still has to continue.
Thank you for coming. I'm with the governor's office. I'm going to be fielding questions as the governor is currently being shaved.
Born and raised in Omaha, he's experienced firsthand discrimination.
We have Black people and people of color and minorities in this city that have experienced and known and lived racism our entire lives here. And then there are white people in the city that haven't seen it, haven't experienced it. And there were lots of national tragedies happening that were highlighting things. And then here in our own city, as people came out to protest, we experienced that same very thing.
While funding, resources, and comprehensive transportation system is a start, Cameron says changing a system that is arguably as old as the country's inception starts with one person at a time.
Again, in talking about this, in living this, and researching this, these are things I've seen. I've talked to a lot of wonderful people who have helped demonstrate to me that we can hope and wish, and we can make jokes and hope people pay more attention. But the truth is that no matter how much light shedding we do, it has to be tangible. It has to be money. It has to be laws. It has to be policy. And we have to have leaders in a community that understands that. And so the light shedding is just step one. Getting people to understand a joke, that's step 0.5. Getting people to do the research, that's step 1. Getting people to accept it, step 2, and on and on and on until we start putting in place some really, really hard, practical solutions.
Created, but it's also important to understand how communities came together.
Latrina holds out optimism to mend the city's divide.
I left in 2013. I felt like I came back to a whole new city in 2017. So I am hopeful just because of some of the changes I've already seen.
However, Cameron struggles to find that same hope for the future.
I am not particularly optimistic. My fear is that with everything that we see in the country, we see more and more division and less willing to learn. I think people need to be met at a table where they can listen to each other first. And until we're willing to set down some of the preconceived notions that we have about each other, it's going to be very, very difficult to come together. And I have a hard time believing that time is coming. I want to be optimistic, but it's difficult.
And for our third and final part of our investigation, Alexa Blaze uncovers the impact on the people within the city.
Omaha is projected to surpass the 1 million mark in the next 2 years. While this seems like good news, the transit system is already struggling to keep up with growth. As birth rates skyrocket and immigration continues, one UNO student exemplifies the harsh reality of this. Number 55. It's said to possess a spiritual power, independence, self-sufficiency, and even adventure. For UNO senior Jasmine Pineda, the double digit is also her proverbial lifeline. Route 55 takes her to work, college classes, healthcare appointments, and even to see her family.
Because I feel like most of the time, since it takes up so much of my time, I feel like I lose myself with just being a student and like an employee. Like I don't have time to do anything outside of that.
Before the sun rises, she feeds her cats, gathers her belongings according to the day. If it's a work day or a school day, she still faces a 15-minute walk to get to the nearest bus stop. From there, it's a long haul to get to the area transit close to the university. Once there, it's another hike for Jasmine to get to Mav Landing, the site where she boards her final shuttle to North Campus. All about a 45 to 60-minute commute on a good day. But those good days will be fewer as the cold winter season in Nebraska kicks in.
Having your employer call you at the last minute when you're at the store telling you we're closed and you walked and you're now stuck in the middle of a snowstorm. I think that's something I don't want to experience again, personally.
The journalism and media communication major moved from her South Omaha community to an apartment in West Omaha, an area where she says she often feels like an outsider. Still, Jasmine says she's never second-guessed pursuing her passion for storytelling, despite hauling the some 50 pounds of awkward gear.
So I had to actually drop my media storytelling class because of that. And it was during a time where I also was like working really hard that like I got a swollen ankle, so I couldn't carry any of the equipment because it was that same size, the tripod, the camera. And so I had to drop my media storytelling class for that semester.
The elements challenge even the best of Omaha drivers, but the wind, snow, ice, and sub-freezing temperatures of winter proves to make public transportation incredibly unpredictable.
I've seen 2 buses stop working at once. One came to pick up the people riding the bus, and it also stopped working. So it puts a lot of people behind on schedule, or sometimes the bus drivers won't stop for you for whatever reason, so then you have to wait for the next one.
Not only is it challenging physically to get much needed care in a case like this, it also impacts Jasmine emotionally, because what may be a simple imposition to a person with a car, it goes deeper for Jasmine. Missing a class impacts her grades, which impacts her scholarship. By being absent, she doesn't get the materials for the day. She misses important class discussion, and she can even lose attendance and participation points. Again, another unintended consequence when a city of almost 1 million residents doesn't provide good public transportation.
I'd really like to see Omaha get real about just the transportation ecosystem and like a network that all works together. You know, yes, there will always be folks that need to drive cars, and that's fine. We're not going to try to take anyone's car keys away. But what we do need to do is make sure that those folks who don't have the choice to drive are also able to get around Omaha, whether it's to healthcare, to jobs, to grocery stores. I mean, there's a lot, transportation touches everything.
Moving from Acapulco to Omaha when she was 4, Jasmine sported a maturity beyond her years. Her school and community were in walking distance, but by the time she turned 10, she learned to navigate Omaha's public transportation system out of necessity.
It just became a part of my daily life, trying to get anywhere. And then I moved out, and then I really had to rely on it to go to doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, basically any errand or anything I needed to do.
Jasmine says with the creation of Orbit, her experience getting to and from her destination is much easier because of the consistency the bus service provides. It's even better because it's free for university students. Nevertheless, there are times when riding the bus in inclement weather is the least of her worries.
Even just the waiting stations, having that information of, oh, the next bus comes in X amount of time, or even just the way that's nicely built. Some bus stops don't even have benches, or there's sometimes at night, especially for a young girl like me, it can get like very dangerous, and I've had like certain scary encounters with people. There's like no lighting, no benches, and it's raining, and then,
The storyteller in her enjoys the time observing the good and the bad of our community. Jasmine says she's seen bus drivers simply pass her at the stop, while others she claims don't provide a sense of safety for their passengers.
Where I took one of the buses from my home downtown, and there was a man who was talking to me, and he was trying to follow me all the way to campus. And I was visibly uncomfortable, and no one did anything. I've had men yell at me, and no one says anything. I've seen it happen to other people.
This fall, Metro Transit added touchless payments. The app allows people to pay for their fare and also gives tech-savvy riders like Jasmine the ability to track her bus. That translates to less time spent waiting and wondering. Latrina Hall says, while it's a step forward, that may not work for all users.
I think that's why school districts are thinking through how they're providing the actual devices and Wi-Fi to students when it comes to education. So I don't know if using that same type of approach is possible for a public transportation organization, but there does need to be some thought about the folks who could kind of fall through the cracks when it comes to that.
The common denominator for Omaha's future comes down to greenbacks. Progress takes time and money. As the old saying goes, time waits for no one. But money can be found in the signing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, by President Joe Biden November 5th. The White House media release says the $1 trillion investment, the largest in the nation's history, will provide $89.9 billion in guaranteed funding over the next 5 years. Executive Director Mike Helgerson says the federal money will be in addition to the already nearly $17 million the association already receives. However, he cautions it's too early to tell how and where the money will be spent.
Well, so currently we get about $16 to $17 million a year of project funding, let's say. So that, that's for everything from roads to bridges to, transit bus replacements to all of that stuff. It's about 17 or 18, I guess, now. It's difficult to say because the way the math works out, so the total pool of funding is growing, but the amount that's allocated to organizations like us is growing, and our population has grown. And so it's difficult to kind of suss out exactly what that number would be, but certainly, I would say a rough estimate of more than 25%, 25 to 33%, possibly more. So that, $18 million number might become something more like $25 million. It might be more. We don't really know. And so it's difficult to do the math without Congress kind of finishing their work.
He says the 33% increase is enough to add a couple additional projects each year. This is in addition to other federal, state, and private funding provided.
And that's just in that first $1 trillion. Whatever this second $1.7 trillion ends up being, that's a whole different ballgame. There might be some opportunities to find ways of investing in transportation through some of those programs as well.
Remember that Metro Next plan and the 24th Street corridor investment?
And that begins with Metro Next, the 5-year plan to build a transportation system across 24th Street.
Big numbers. We don't normally talk about $1 trillion, so it's kind of hard to wrap our heads around it.
MAPA is an intergovernmental organization, according to Mike. It creates the long-term public transportation plan, and it also invests federal resources. MAPA is the source for ongoing planning and can act as a sort of a watchdog for economic growth. Mike says his group focuses on the people of our community and their access to opportunity.
But certainly kind of a core of all of that, and the way that we kind of cross-cut looking at all those goals together at the same time, is really walkable communities connected by transit, connected by other modes of transportation outside of the vehicle, and really trying to grow our community in that direction.
Which is exactly what Jasmine loves so much about her South Omaha community.
Immigrants or not, a lot of people are tied back to the same places they immigrated from. So, because of my parents and how talkative they are, I've met people who come from the same towns that I did or that they did. And it feels like such a small world at the same time. So there's just a big sense of community.
You're listening to Mavradio.
Jasmine says at the end of a busy 8-hour day, excluding her 2 hours spent in transit, she regrets nothing about her decisions.
I think just to have that creative freedom in general, for me, to me, the possibilities are endless with what I can do with that.
And those seemingly endless hours spent walking, waiting, and writing, Jasmine calls herself fortunate.
I'm inspired just by the normalcy of things around me. I think that's one of the best things that have come out of taking public transportation, like meeting new people, even people who just dump their stories on me, and I'm just like, wow, that even inspires me to write my own stories.
Besides the dream of creating content through her writing, photography, and video production skills, Jasmine has another dream, and that's to get back to her South Omaha community, where she says her banking, grocery store, small businesses, and friends are all on the same street.
It's like being homesick.
As the first snow of the year arrives, the little girl who immigrated to a new country at 4, learned a city's culture by 10, and is set to graduate with her bachelor's degree in May, will take the exam for her Nebraska Class O license. The woman, with a dream of telling stories, credits her perseverance with getting her this far. And perhaps she'll start a career by telling her own story. And the title of it?
From nowhere. I think that's what I would do. Because I think a lot of the times that's what it feels like. I'm from here, but I'm not from there. But I'm from there, but not also from here. So I think that's what I would title it.
Our thanks go out to Mike Helgerson, Jason Rose, Sarah Johnson, Cameron Logston, and the folks with Together Omaha and UNO's Service Learning Academy. Finally, we want to give our heartfelt thank you to Jasmine Pineda. Without her, the series would not have been possible. For all of our school communication reporters, photographers, researchers, and of course the TV staff, we're so glad you could share this time. We hope you enjoyed Omaha Transit and learned something along the way.